My name is Garrett, and for as long as I can remember, Sunday family dinners at my parents' house have been a cornerstone of my life. A time when we set aside our busy schedules to share stories, laughter, and the comforting aroma of Mom's homemade lasagna. Those evenings were usually predictable, filled with light-hearted banter and gentle teasing among siblings. Yet, nothing in my past could have prepared me for the shock that would unravel one such evening. It was a cool, breezy autumn evening when I arrived at the old, familiar house on Maple Street. The front porch was adorned with garlands of autumn leaves, and a sense of warmth radiated from the windows as soft light spilled into the dusk. I greeted my parents with the usual hugs, exchanged pleasantries with my siblings, and settled into a comfortable rhythm that had defined our gatherings for years. The house buzzed with energy as cousins and aunts and uncles made their way into the dining room, their voices melding into a harmonious background hum. I was halfway through helping Mom plate the food when my older brother, Brennan, burst through the front door with an exuberance that immediately drew everyone's attention. Brennan, ever the free spirit, had always been the unpredictable one in our family. Someone who embraced life with open arms, often making decisions on the spur of the moment. That night, however, his arrival carried an unexpected twist. Striding into the room with an arm casually draped around the shoulder of a young woman, Brennan's smile was wide and unapologetic. The moment her eyes met mine, I felt as if time had slowed. The woman standing by him was strikingly familiar. With long, wavy chestnut hair and eyes that seemed to hold a blend of mischief and melancholy, she exuded an aura that stirred old memories. My heart skipped a beat as I realized who she was. Sierra, my ex-girlfriend from years ago. I froze for a split second, my mind desperately trying to process what was happening. Sierra, who had once filled my days with laughter and passion during our college years, now stood before me in the guise of Brennan's new girlfriend. I could almost feel the weight of our shared past pressing against the present moment. The entire room seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, as hushed whispers and curious glances flickered between family members. Brennan, completely oblivious to the turmoil his choice of companion was causing, announced with his trademark enthusiasm, "Everyone, meet Sierra." His voice boomed across the dining room, eliciting a mix of surprised gasps and tentative smiles from those around us. I managed a polite nod, but inside, a torrent of emotions churned: shock, betrayal, and a deep-seated hurt that I had long thought was buried. The initial minutes of dinner were a blur of forced smiles and strained conversation. I tried to focus on the familiar cadence of our family ritual, but every time I caught sight of Sierra, memories of our past flooded back with an intensity one wasn't prepared to face. I recalled long nights spent talking about our dreams, the shared laughter echoing through quiet dorm rooms, and even the bittersweet moments of our breakup. Moments that I had carefully locked away in the recesses of my heart. As the meal progressed, I found myself retreating into silence, isolating my feelings behind a mask of calm. I couldn't help but notice the subtle glances exchanged between Sierra and Brennan. Glances that carried an intimacy I wasn't sure belonged solely to a budding romance. Was it possible that Sierra still harbored feelings for me? Or had the past been completely forgotten, replaced by a new chapter with Brennan? The questions swirled in my mind like autumn leaves caught in a sudden gust of wind. I excused myself briefly under the pretense of helping clear the table, hoping that a moment of solitude might offer me some clarity. Stepping out onto the back porch, I found the cool night air a welcome contrast to the warmth of the bustling dining room. I leaned against the weathered wooden railing and stared out into the darkening sky, trying to collect my thoughts. Every memory of Sierra came crashing back. The way her laughter used to fill a silent room, the promise in her eyes that once made me believe in forever. Now that promise seemed like a distant echo, a ghost from a past that refused to die. In that quiet moment, I wrestled with the realization that our shared history was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. Part of me wanted to confront the situation head-on, demanding answers from Brennan about why he hadn't mentioned anything about Sierra, or even reaching out to Sierra herself to understand what had led her back into this tangled web of relationships. But another part of me was paralyzed by the fear that any confrontation might shatter the fragile peace of our family gatherings forever. Returning to the dining room, I forced a smile as I rejoined the table, determined to maintain the facade of normalcy. Conversation resumed around me, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of voices blending into a soothing background melody. Yet, the presence of Sierra loomed over every word, every gesture, a constant reminder that the past was never truly behind us. Throughout the remainder of the dinner, I observed how our family members interacted with Sierra. Some exchanged friendly greetings as if she were a long-lost friend, while others seemed hesitant, as if unsure how to bridge the gap between our history and the present. Brennan, for his part, remained blissfully unaware of the internal conflict he had inadvertently sparked in me. His eyes shone with excitement as he recounted stories of his recent adventures with Sierra, stories that now felt painfully ironic given the history we shared. After dinner, as the evening wound down and the guests began to disperse into smaller groups for coffee and dessert, I found myself alone with Sierra in a quiet corner of the living room. The soft glow of a table lamp cast gentle shadows across her face, highlighting the vulnerability in her eyes. "Garrett," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know this must be hard for you. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words were laden with regret, and in that moment, I saw the sincerity in her expression. A sincerity that made my heart ache even more. I searched her face for answers, trying to decipher whether this unexpected reunion was merely a cruel twist of fate or an opportunity for some form of reconciliation. "Sierra," I managed to say, my voice trembling with the weight of unspoken emotions. "I don't understand. Why now? After everything, how did we end up here?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she hesitated, clearly torn between the past and the present. "I thought I'd moved on," she admitted. "But seeing you again, it's like all the memories came rushing back, and I realized there's a part of me that still cares." Her confession sent a shiver down my spine, reopening wounds I had long tried to seal. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, a blend of anger, longing, and a deep-seated sadness that threatened to overwhelm me. In that moment, I realized that the collision of our past and the present was inevitable, that the ghosts of our history were not so easily exorcised. As the night drew to a close and the last of our relatives began to leave, I found myself alone with my thoughts on the front porch. The cool night air whispered promises of new beginnings, but also carried the weight of unresolved questions. How had our lives diverged so dramatically? And yet here we were, bound by memories that neither time nor distance could erase. I knew that the events of that evening were just the beginning, a spark that would ignite a series of confrontations, revelations, and perhaps painful truths that would force me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the enduring power of the past. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with questions, I made a silent vow. I would seek the answers I needed, no matter how difficult they might be. The journey ahead promised to be as unpredictable as it was inevitable, and I braced myself for the storm of emotions that was sure to follow. In the end, as I walked back into the quiet sanctuary of our family home, I realized that the reunion with Sierra was not just an unexpected twist of fate. It was a doorway to confronting the unresolved chapters of my life. And with that realization, the path to healing, however uncertain and fraught with pain, began to unfold before me. The morning after that fateful family dinner, the shock of seeing Sierra, a ghost from my past, still clung to me like a stubborn fog. I awoke with my heart heavy and my thoughts in disarray, unable to shake the feeling that the events of the previous night were far from over. As I sat at my kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, I replayed every moment in excruciating detail. The way Sierra's eyes had met mine as she was introduced by Brennan, the silence that had followed in the dining room, and the bittersweet whisper of her apology as we found a quiet moment together later. I tried to lose myself in the mundane rituals of the morning, reading the newspaper, tidying up the remnants of the family dinner, and listening to the familiar hum of our old house settling into the early hours. Yet, every familiar sound and scent was tainted by the memory of Sierra. I felt as though I were suspended between two worlds, the life I had built, defined by stability and routine, and the past I thought I'd long outgrown. Brennan's carefree smile and unawareness of the undercurrent of tension now haunted my thoughts. At breakfast, he bounded into the room, brimming with energy and boasting about plans for a new adventure, completely oblivious to the turmoil he had ignited in me. His laughter rang out as if the previous night were just a fleeting, inconsequential event. But for me, it was anything but fleeting. Unable to bear the constant reminders, I excused myself to take a walk around the neighborhood. As I strolled along tree-lined streets, the cool autumn air provided a temporary refuge from my swirling emotions. I recalled long nights spent together with Sierra, when we'd wander through campus under a starry sky, dreaming about the future. Those memories now felt both distant and painfully immediate, a reminder that the passage of time does little to erase the chapters of one's heart. By early afternoon, I had resolved that avoidance wouldn't heal me. I needed answers, even if it meant dredging up painful memories. I decided to confront my feelings directly and wrote a brief, tentative message to Sierra. I typed, "Sierra, can we meet? I need to understand what happened last night and what it means for us now." I hesitated before sending it, knowing that reopening old wounds could either lead to clarity or more heartache. But the urge for closure was stronger than my fear. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute thick with anticipation and dread. When my phone finally buzzed with a reply, my pulse quickened. Sierra agreed to meet later that evening at a quiet, familiar park near our old college campus, a place filled with memories both joyful and painful. While waiting for the meeting, I decided to confront Brennan about his part in the mess. I found him in the living room, casually flipping through a magazine, his demeanor unchanged from the night before. "Brennan," I began, trying to steady my voice, "we need to talk about last night." His smile faltered for just a moment before he said, "Sure, man. I'm really sorry if I upset you. I honestly didn't realize how much history there was between you and Sierra." His tone was sincere, yet I couldn't help but feel that my pain was minimized by his unawareness of the depth of our shared past. "I'm not just upset because of the shock," I explained, my voice trembling with controlled anger. "It's about respect, about the fact that you brought someone from my past into our family space without any warning. You knew there was history, and I feel betrayed that you didn't consider how it might affect me." Brennan ran his hand through his hair and looked down, clearly regretful. "I screwed up, Garrett. I should have talked to you first. I'm really sorry." Although his apology was heartfelt, I knew it would take time to mend the fissure that had suddenly opened between us. The conversation left me with mixed emotions: anger, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal, yet also a faint glimmer of understanding. Brennan, in his own impulsive way, had not meant to hurt me, but his recklessness had forced me to confront the unresolved chapters of my past. As we went our separate ways that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I wasn't ready for. Later that evening, I arrived at the park well before our scheduled meeting with Sierra. I found a secluded bench under a large oak tree and sat, watching as the golden hues of the setting sun filtered through the leaves. Each rustling sound seemed to echo memories of conversations we once had, and the cool breeze carried whispers of days that were both tender and painful. It wasn't long before Sierra appeared along the winding path, her silhouette framed by the soft light of dusk. She looked different than I remembered, more mature, yet with the same gentle vulnerability in her eyes. As she approached, my heart pounded with a mix of apprehension and anticipation. "Sierra," I greeted her softly. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy with unsaid words and memories too deep to ignore. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Garrett, I'm sorry for last night. I didn't expect to see you like that, and I never intended for it to cause you pain." Her voice was tinged with regret, and as she spoke, I could see the sincerity etched in every line of her face. "I appreciate your apology," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "But I need to understand what brought you here with Brennan tonight. Did you ever truly move on from our past? Or is there something more behind all of this?" My question hung in the cool air between us, a challenge and a plea for truth. Sierra's eyes glistened as she took a deep breath. "I thought I had moved on," she began, her voice wavering slightly. After we parted ways, I tried to build a new life for myself. But sometimes the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. Meeting Brennan, spending time with him, it stirred feelings I believed were long buried. She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands. I never wanted to hurt you, Garrett. I care about you deeply, and a part of me always will. But with Brennan, it wasn't about rekindling what we had. It was about finding something new. I didn't realize how complicated it would be. I listened intently, the internal battle raging within me intensifying. Part of me wanted to cling to the possibility of something more, a spark that had never entirely died out. Yet another part of me was determined to protect the progress I'd made in moving on from our shared past. Sierra, I'm not sure what to make of all this, I admitted, my voice low and filled with vulnerability. I've spent so many years trying to let go, to bury those memories and build a future free from the weight of our history. But seeing you again, feeling this mix of pain and longing, it's like my heart is being pulled in two different directions. The admission was raw, exposing my deepest insecurities and regrets. For a long while, we sat there in silence, the only sound the distant chirp of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. I realized that this moment was a crossroads, a chance for both of us to face our past and decide whether to let it define us or to finally leave it behind. As darkness settled around us, Sierra spoke once more, her tone resolute. I don't want to be a source of pain for you, Garrett. I think we need to acknowledge what happened between us, find closure, and then decide what our lives mean moving forward. Her words, though soft, carried the weight of a finality I wasn't sure I was ready to embrace. I nodded slowly. Maybe that's the only way, I murmured. We have to face the past, no matter how painful, if we ever want to move on completely. In that quiet, moonlit moment, surrounded by the shadows of memories and the promise of a new beginning, I realized that the reunion with Sierra had forced me to confront not only our shared history, but also the lingering parts of myself that had been waiting for resolution. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with emotional turmoil, but it was a path I knew I had to walk. As we eventually parted ways that night, I was left with a profound sense of both loss and hope, a bittersweet reminder that sometimes the echoes of the past must be faced head-on before we can truly embrace the future. With each step away from the park, I carried the weight of our conversation, wondering if closure was truly possible or if the scars of old love would forever linger in the quiet corners of my heart. That night, after our long conversation in the park, I returned home with a heart that felt both heavy and oddly lighter. Over the following days, the events of the past few weeks slowly began to settle into a bittersweet clarity. I realized that the painful encounter with Sierra and the tumultuous ripple it sent through my family was not merely a cruel twist of fate, but an opportunity for healing and understanding. In the days after our meeting, I made a conscious effort to process everything that had happened. I sat down with my journal, pouring my thoughts and emotions onto the pages. I wrote about the shock of seeing Sierra at the dinner table, the confusion and anger I felt when Brennan introduced her without a word, and the long, haunting silence that followed. I also wrote about the bittersweet moments, the memory of shared laughter during our college days, the lingering hope that maybe something precious was lost but not entirely gone, and the quiet vulnerability I discovered in that moonlit park. With every word, I felt the weight of my past begin to ease, replaced by a tentative acceptance that some chapters of our lives are meant to be revisited before we can truly move on. Brennan, too, began to take steps toward mending the rift that had grown between us. After our talk about the previous night, he reached out with an earnest apology, not just for the act itself, but for the thoughtlessness that had wounded me so deeply. We spent an afternoon alone, discussing our memories, our failures, and the importance of respecting each other's histories, even if they weren't always pleasant. I realized that his impulsiveness had not come from malice, but from a genuine desire to embrace life's surprises. Though I still harbored hurt, our conversation allowed a seed of forgiveness to sprout. I knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but I also knew that the willingness to listen and understand was the first step toward reconciliation. As for Sierra, our paths continued to cross in quiet, unexpected moments. There was a time when I caught a glimpse of her at a local coffee shop. Another time when our mutual friends mentioned her in passing. Each encounter was a reminder of our shared past. A past that was both beautiful and painful. I learned that Sierra had started to attend a weekly support group, a place where she and others with complicated histories could find solace in honest conversation. Inspired by her courage, I decided to join one of the meetings. It was there, amid a circle of strangers all seeking healing, that I began to understand that my pain was not a unique burden, but a universal experience of loss and transformation. In the soft glow of those evenings, I came to see that closure isn't a dramatic, sudden event. It's a gradual process of piecing together broken memories into a mosaic of acceptance. I met with Sierra one last time. A final conversation meant not to rekindle old flames, but to say goodbye to what we once were. We met in a quiet corner of a small park near the support group's meeting place, the sky a canvas of deep blues and soft starlight. "Sierra," I began, my voice steady but laced with the tenderness of all the emotions I'd carried. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about you, about Brennan, and about all the memories we share. I want you to know that I've come to a place where I can finally say goodbye, not to you, but to the pain and confusion that kept me chained to the past." Her eyes, filled with both sorrow and gratitude, met mine as she whispered, "I've been wanting to hear you say that for a long time, Garrett. I never meant to hurt you, and I hope you can forgive me for my part in all this." I reached out, offering her a gentle smile. "I forgive you, Sierra, and I'm not saying we should forget what we had. It's part of who I am. But I need to move forward now, without these ghosts haunting every moment." In that quiet, starlit moment, we both acknowledged that the chapter of our intimate past was closing, leaving behind lessons that would guide us rather than chains that would bind us. In the weeks that followed, the tension in our family slowly eased. Family dinners resumed with a new sense of caution and understanding. Brennan made sure to give everyone a heads up about new developments, and I found that my renewed ability to forgive opened up space for deeper conversations with him. The scars of that fateful evening remained, but they no longer defined my every interaction. As autumn deepened, the days grew shorter and the nights colder, yet I felt an inner warmth, a quiet assurance that I was finally ready to embrace the future. I continued to write, finding solace in the creative process, and even started painting again, a hobby long forgotten. Each brushstroke became a small act of liberation, a way to transform the pain of the past into something beautiful and personal. One chilly evening, as I sat on my porch watching the first snowflakes drift lazily from the sky, I realized that the storm of emotions had passed. The encounter with Sierra, once a source of unbearable pain, had instead become a catalyst for self-discovery and healing. I had learned that love, whether lost, unrequited, or complicated, leaves its mark on us, but it does not have to shackle us forever. Instead, it can guide us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves, teaching us the strength of vulnerability and the power of forgiveness. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs, and silently vowed to live with an open heart, one that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. In that promise lay the hope of renewal and the quiet joy of stepping forward into a future unburdened by regret. As I turned in for the night, I knew that the road ahead would still have its twists and unexpected turns. But I was no longer afraid. I had learned that true closure comes not from erasing memories, but from accepting them, learning from them, and ultimately, letting them shape a stronger, wiser self. Under the gentle glow of the streetlights and the watchful gaze of the stars, I embraced the final truth, that every ending is but a prelude to a new beginning.